Good morning, little chicken nuggets. Oh wait, this isn't a cool Carl video. This is Brother Jason with FX412 Youth Ministry, and we're coming to you this morning in the cold outdoors. So we got a new cat this month, and what cats like to do is while you're walking, they walk around and they walk directly where your feet are going to be, and you tend to accidentally step on them and it surprises you. Kind of like temptation and sin. It's always where you don't expect it to be, and it always surprises you. But we know how to deal with it, and we're going to study that today from the book of Daniel this morning in our devotional. Alright, so where we left off in the book of Daniel, Daniel and his three friends are in captivity in Babylon. And they've been pressed into Babylon High School, and they're to learn to serve the king there. And so that's where we left off. So verse 8 picks up. It says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." So what's critical here is that Daniel purposed in his heart. Remember in the intro we talked about sin and temptation always feels like it's going to creep up on you. And so because you never know where it's going to be, sometimes you do know where it's going to be and you still go there. You need to decide in your heart what you're going to do when the temptation to sin shows up. And in Daniel's case, he knew that eating food sacrificed to idols was a sin. It was basically submitting to or taking part in the worship of those false idols. And so Daniel decided in his heart that he was not going to do that. And so he developed a plan so that instead of sinning, he could serve the Lord. Look at verses 9 and 10 with me. It says, "Now God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king." So here's what's going on. Daniel and the eunuch, the guy who's in charge of Daniel, actually became friends. So here's a big deal. Daniel wasn't a jerk. Daniel wasn't a jerk. Instead, he was kind to everyone, even those who were in authority over him, even those who didn't share his faith. This guy that Daniel has made friends with is basically his boss in the land he's brought into captivity in. This guy that Daniel made friends with is not a Jew, is not a Christian by any stretch of the imagination. And yet, Daniel developed enough of a friendship with him, he was kind enough to him, that this guy would actually hear him out. I feel like that's a problem for a lot of Christians today. When we don't like something or when we don't like what someone is doing, we're mean to them. But that's not the case ever of how we should respond. Look at the rest of the passage with me. This is Daniel's plan to serve the Lord instead of sin. It says, "So Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Please test your servants for 10 days and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants." So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. So essentially what was happening was in the cafeteria, if you will, of Babylon High School, Daniel and his friends were offered the best food in the land. Succulent steaks, delicious wine, wonderful like chocolate cakes, various pastries. Oh wait, you wouldn't like any of that stuff, so let me put it on your level. They were offered cheese pizza and Mountain Dew, and maybe a side of M&Ms for dessert. The problem was all that stuff had been made and dedicated to the false idols, the demonic things that the Babylonians worshipped. And Daniel knew it. And so it would have been a sin. Daniel would have broken the first and second commandments, having a God before God, basically the king, his boss, and then also worshiping idols. And Daniel didn't want to do that. So his solution is to replace something bad, something evil, with something good, something holy. Now, how could he replace an idol with something good? What he was going to do was he was going to refuse to do what the idolatry demanded, and instead he was going to do what he felt was serving to the Lord. Now, I want to ask you a question. How could you do this? How could you replace something bad that is an idol with something good? So let me give you a couple of examples. If maybe you're addicted to social media, or you're into some dark places on social media, or you don't treat people very nicely in social media, maybe you could fast from social media and commit to studying your Bible every day. Maybe if you like watching sinful R-rated movies, maybe instead of doing that, maybe you could listen to some Christian music while you do an activity. Or maybe instead of solo playing through some violent video game that you wouldn't want your little brothers and sisters to hear, maybe instead you could play a board game with your family and spend some good time. So those are just some ways you could do what Daniel did. Replace something bad with something good. Purpose in your heart. You're not going to participate in the evil stuff. Purpose in your heart that instead you're going to do something godly. So last two verses, verse 15 and 16, it says, "And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables." So Daniel's plan, just to recap, was he would refuse to eat the steaks and drink the wine that the king offered, and instead he would eat vegetables and drink water. Or in your world, he would refuse to eat cheese pizza and would instead eat an apple. So what Daniel's plan, what was the result of it? The results were he was healthier, he was in better shape than the other guys who were totally okay with disobeying the Lord. And so here's the totality of how Daniel's plan worked. He didn't sin, he grew closer to God, he ended up being healthier than the other guys, and ultimately it changed the policy of this high school cafeteria to serve healthy stuff that hadn't been dedicated to idols instead of the bad stuff that had been dedicated to idols. All because Daniel purposed in his heart to serve God. And so I want to ask you a question as we leave today. What do you need to do to purpose in your heart for God? What is that one thing that God is nagging at you? You really shouldn't be into that anymore. You need to purpose in your heart to walk away from it. And what is the thing God is telling you need to purpose in your heart to do to serve His kingdom? Think about that today. Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a great day going to school on a laptop.